Hey, what's up, viewer? Welcome back to the Nebulous Live Development Creation Series. In the last video, I was sorting out some issues with hovering and selecting a star once the player is inside of the nebula. And it led me to reworking the shader and moving it into a different method of instantiating stars based on data and not on separate prefabs. So if I come into the game and I zoom in on this particular nebula, the problem is that, okay, so there's one that's proper size. Okay, so for some reason now the star is the correct size. It wasn't doing that. Oh, and actually this is a perfect time to test. Okay, so as we can see here, the highlight color, the problem is that the highlight color is not emitting anything. Sorry if you can hear my cat outside. Alright, so this solved one of the problems, which was that for, oh no. Okay, so that's really strange. So if I zoom out here, the size goes back to being tiny. If I grab a different nebula, do they get to their correct size? So that's weird. For whatever reason, they are they're not supposed to be shifting their scale on instantiation. Sorry about my cat out there. Alright, but it looked like that was working properly. Let's give another random spawn and take a look. This is why some kind of UI element would be cool, because it's so small that representing it as a UI element would probably not be a bad idea. Man, I'm sorry about my cat outside. Alright, so I mean, this is more or less correct then. That's uncool how the stars are so close together. So I'm debating on spacing. I'm debating on the spacing in general, because the next step is going to be, once the star is selected, the player is going to be able to zoom in on the star. And as we see, it even is still spawning celestials correctly. So it's a little jacked up though, but okay. So with that done, the next thing I'm going to do is in fact yank all of the non-relevant shaders and prefabs, because it's just a lot more structured like this. And I'm gonna have to tweak the emission values on these to match the intensity, apparently. So 6. Oh, whoops, it's alpha. And I'm probably not going to like these colors, but let's see how they look. Okay, so now in this instance, if I enter play mode, I just don't like it very much, to be completely honest. And this one's not even changing. It might be, well, it shouldn't be too small. Okay, so it's just incorrect, honestly. Like, I guess the blue intensity makes sense, but it's almost like it's backwards or something. Whoops. Okay. So like it's changing, but it's just not. It's just not. There's just not a visual difference made. Excuse me. And it's also emitting incorrectly. So it's combining the emission values together, and it's not actually doing what it's supposed to be doing. Like that one's a little close, but like I guess orange and green makes yellow or something. And this one just doesn't even seem to be working at all. It is, though. It's just, I guess, yellow to green is so subtle. That's the only real issue. So I would... I guess, like... I might have to take a completely different approach to this because the lighting is just incorrect. It's not highlighting the edge correctly, basically. It's blending the light colors. So, what if we change hover color to like white or something? Basically. Okay, so that's a little better. It just... the player can tell that they are... like selected... they can tell it's getting highlighted. But the idea of it being magenta doesn't seem to solve the problem. So maybe... what if I just made this white also? So like, this star is just too small for the raycast to grab it. So like, I just don't know if this is going to work in the long run. It's going to need a... I feel like it's going to need a UI element anyway. Basically. and then I could use the UI element as the active selector. So it's working at this size, but if I zoom out, the tiny red star does not, in fact, highlight correctly. Alright, so I'm probably just going to have to bite the bullet and do some UI additions where every star gets a screen space panel, basically, that depicts star info. Or marks it as an active selection or something like that, because the player's just going to get ticked off if they have to. Well, here, let me see if I maximize this. Yeah, I mean, if and it's technically working, but it's just not great. That's all I can say about it. It would be cool in the long run to like get this zoom to be exactly correct. So that's all it's doing is it's saying the star is actively selected. Oops. And actually, let me check something. If that zoomed out, did it in fact... Okay, it's not selected anymore, good. Anyway, this shouldn't be either, so I'll have to fix that too. Okay, so... the other thing I might need to do is change the scalar values. So I'll have to decide on that part. Alright, so there was another thing I wanted to do, which was, effectively, instead of each physical nebula instantiating all of its stars immediately, the idea would be that the nebula builder instead basically makes an array of ints, and each int is one of the star values, and then anytime that nebula is entered, it gathers a pool of stars, essentially. Something like this. And effectively, I actually need to test something really fast here. And double check if start runs every time the object is activated or deactivated. So if I activate Active Nebula, it does run. Oh, it only ran once though. Okay, so essentially I could probably just use a function. The idea is that the active nebula needs to like basically for each star in nebula for nebula star pool up to nebula star count, each pool star gets reassigned its values from the data, basically. So I'm essentially going to have to move a lot of this to a different place. Okay, so I do believe the nebula. Okay, so there's a nebula star script. I think I already have a quote-unquote nebula data somewhere. Okay, no, I do not. It's just super. So I call this like star data. I already have that. So I'd have to call it something like a star values or something. Or like nebula's star values, maybe. I don't want to call it data because that assumes it's coming from somewhere else. The idea is that each nebula on creation is assigned its particular data values. So I'm going to make this a structure. I'm just going to call this nebula star values. And it's going to be pretty straightforward. It's just going to be so there's how many stars, and there's public int array star type the star types, and then it's gonna need a vector3 array for star positions. As long as I can put a vector3 inside of a strict, of course. And it doesn't need a star count because you can get star count from star types. But effectively, star types gets assigned and star positions get assigned. And then the stars positions get set from here, and the stars color and scale get set from here. Man, I'm sorry about my cat. She's kind of annoying me. She's not allowed to come inside right now because she keeps messing on the floor. Alright, so this is going to have to do with an active nebula. There basically needs to just be a function that says build stars, basically. And more or less, all that does is, I'm not sure if I need a start function at all. Oh, I might need a start function, actually, if I need to grab data. But I think the idea is basically that a nebula's star values come into this function, and you say for values dot star types dot length All right, and we also don't want to I mean, basically, what we really need here is a queue of gameobject. And this is actually how this is just essentially how it's going to work. Oh, it's not letting me write gameobject cube? Can I do that? Oh, so it's not generic. Oh, okay. I was under the impression it was a little generic. Whatever, so on start we have to say like nebula star pool equals new queue, and I just have to like give it a capacity. So I'll just make the initial capacity like 48 or something. Or probably, let's go 32 since it's binary. And effectively, if I'm building stars, the active nebula needs to say gameobject star equals nebula star pool dot dq. Oh, okay, so I was trying to do that, in fact. Call this a game object queue. Except for it's really not happy that, okay, there we go. So then we dequeue something in the pool, which means we're not instantiating a brand new one. It already exists somewhere in memory. We are then saying star dot transform dot position equals values dot star positions at I. And then we also have to say like basically these. Basically all of this. It's not exactly correct, but the position gets set, the transforms scale is going to need something. So I've got to go up here and say star data. Then in start I have to say star data equals gameobject dot find with tag player data get component star data. Then we have star data down here. And its star scale is at I. Or wait. That's not correct. It's not star scales at I. Or wait a minute, hold on. It's actually star scales at values dot star types at I. And then the transform gets set to the active nebula, which I think it already is. So I'll just leave it at this for now. But I think that already happens. So now we're just grabbing the material and we're setting its color values. And this is the same thing as above. It's star data star colors at values dot star types at I. And I must have forgotten something here. Okay, forgot one brace there. And we'll change these for now to say star data hovered colors, but I'm not too proud of that, how that works right now. So I'm going to have to debate on making a UI element that sticks onto the star. But more or less what happens is whenever the and it basically takes the object pool on the active nebula and uses already existing game objects and just changes their values. So on the other side of this, we have to say public void, we'll say remove stars, because it's more or less the same thing. You just come down here and you say nebula star pool, and we have to .enqueue, and with the enqueue, every single star that is a child of this object. So we have to say, like, let's get transform dot children maybe. Okay, so more or less, so for int I0, I less than transform dot child count. You're in queuing. Okay, so this gives me another thing we need to do here, which is say star.enabled or star.setActive true. And down here we have to do the same thing and then pass it in. So then it's transform.getChild maybe, and it just uses an ID. And I'm not sure if that's how that works or not. So once again, we're saying gameObject star equals transform.getChild. Uh-oh, it's not exactly. So it's grabbing the transform. I actually need to get the game object. Then we say star.setEnabled or set active to false, and then enqueue the star, and that just returns it to the pool. And it might be a little slower than using an array, but I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal. But to see long term what happens, that's essentially how you remove the stars. Then you're just taking every child and I guess we can make it a smidgen more optimal. You're going to say if star.enabled or active, star.active. Oh, active self. So if the star is active, do this stuff. But if it's inactive, it doesn't need to actually do these things. Whoops, weird. My bad on that one. So now we're looking at, we'll go like this just to make sure it doesn't like screw itself up in the process. And effectively, if this works correctly, all of the variables are set from the outside except for star positions. Has to get set still. And to do that more or less, okay, so let's see here. So we're yanking this. We are yanking the instantiations. We're yanking the scaling. And the parenting also doesn't need to happen here. Pretty sure. Okay, so the positional stuff is still correct, but I would say this is probably supposed to be a vector 3 now. And we'll call it new star positions. And then the rest of the stuff is basically still correct. However, now it's going to be more like this. And here we're adding new random position. We also have random star choice, which also needs to get added. Okay, so is this on each nebula instance? It is. So every time this nebula is instantiated, it will run the start code and basically fill in its nebula values. So nebula star values, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm going to drag this on here. Oh. Dang it. Okay, so I can't make it a struct, my bad. Dang it. Okay, so let me fix that real quick. I was all excited about making it a struct. I probably still could make it a struct. I'm not going to worry about it right now, though. That's one of those ones I've got funding problems. Okay, so now that I've changed that, I will now run over to the nebula, drop star nebula values on there, and more or less I just need to I'm actually going to do something real quick, which is called generate nebula star values. And the other thing, honestly, is I could possibly, now that this is a mono behavior, I could probably just move like the start function over. to here, and I can just have one mono behavior. So, not using this anymore. I'm not using this anymore either. Everything else is still correct though, so like, let me just give this a shot. If I just copy this entire thing over there, it will have, it's the exact same thing almost. I have to add this. Oops. And more or less, they will grab player data themselves. There's a potential optimization here where I can have the active star object, the active star, or the active nebula game object, on its start, cache the player data, and then I can simply look up. I guess that would require a different component. Well, no, that wouldn't. It would just require the active star component. So I could, oh, well, that's not, I mean, I don't know if that would actually be faster. The idea would be to basically put the player data reference in the parent of the nebula. And then I wouldn't have to find the game object. I would just be able to source it out of the parent, but I don't know if that is necessary right now. So even though it comes to mind as a potential optimization, I'm going to leave it for now. Okay, so what else do we have here? Nebula spawning data we're still using. Star data we're also still using. Okay, but actually what we can do here then is say okay, so it hasn't actually determined how many star types or positions there are. So in fact, it's going to basically I'm making the second list of integers for new star types, which is technically it's a star type ID, but we'll call it that. So now we're coming down here and we're saying I'm trying to see where is it. Where am I using new star positions? Oh, I already did add new star positions. Okay. We're adding random star choice. Alright. And then once the algorithm has completed, we do in fact have to say star types and star positions. To array, basically. So star types equals new star types to array, and star positions equals new star positions to array. And so now we're looking at effectively replacing nebula stars with nebula star values. So I'm going to yank nebula stars, and we now have nebula star values, which is completely random, minus a few global data values. So there's still going to be some other work to do. Let's see here. Active Nebula has to generate this, it has to gather the star data, and then it has to take in a nebula star values, and it's assuming that if it's building these stars, remove stars has already been called, so it's assuming that there are 0 active stars from the star pool. And then when nebula stars gets passed in, it just builds these. Okay, so I'm getting an obvious caching thing here. I can just say this. And that will make it even faster because it is just working on or it basically just replaces, it only has to declare that once throughout the entire life cycle. So, okay. So the last step here is going to be gathering all of this data at the right times for assignment. So I've got to consider how that actually is happening here. The player will have a selection and zoom in, which is okay, so more or less, if I'm entering the nebula, I need to gather the active nebula object, which I just have linked to reference by reference anyway. And I have to get its active nebula component. And then from here, I guess on start, we can just cache that up. As get component. Oh, so active nebula object dot get component, and then we get the active nebula component from that. And then from here, once the action has started, we just come down here and we have to do, I guess we have to do two things. So we have to say active nebula dot, and we're using the, what was it, create stars? Build stars? What do we call it? Build stars. We need to say build stars, but we need a nebula star values. And to do that, we have to gather another component, which is the nebula star values on the active nebula. So I guess the current active selection is the nebula. So let's do a nebula star values, which this actually changes. And we have to take the current active selection and we actually might be able to yank this parenting code because I am in fact only using the star, or I'm not doing this janky thing where I'm unparenting and reparenting anymore. That is getting handled in the other function now. And then right here is where I have to say what did I call it? Nebula star values. So nebula star values equals current active selection data current active selection dot get component, and I have to get the nebula star values from that. Then I can build the stars using those nebula star values. Alright, and then we don't really care if it's transitioning or not. So now we have to test it, or not test it, but we have to do one more thing, which is if we're exiting the nebula to the galaxy, we have to do a similar thing. Which you can do that out here. Or actually, should we do this out here or not? If we do this at the lerp, at the end of the lerp, it needs to deactivate the stars irregardless of if the lerp has finished or not. So if I wait to the end of the lerp and then a different nebula is selected and zoomed into, it will it's going to have to do one or the other. Pretty sure. So let me see here. we do have current active selection. Was it Active Nebula that gives us remove stars? Yes, it was. So, and I have the transform of the Active Nebula already. So the idea would be I think the idea is that it happens in both of these spots, I'm pretty sure. So let's just start here and say, so Active Nebula transform dot get component, and we're going to get the Active Nebula, and the idea is to just say remove stars. Alright, so something I just remembered is that I did set them to deactivated. Alright, so we're just going to have to give this a shot here. Alright, let's see what happens. So let's take a look. We now have these nebula, but they no longer have children. But as we can see, they have randomly selected star types, which is correct. And they should, in fact, have differing star positions, which they do. Okay, so that worked. So now the trick is, if I select this nebula and zoom in, does Active Nebula now gain, what, 4 stars of these particular types? So I guess we'll take a look here. And we ran into some kind of issue. And so the only thing I'm imagining here is that it's calling this in this function before start has run. That's my only idea for this. So that would probably call for Active Nebula to just be turned on by default. And this might force it to be, I might not be able to deactivate the Active Nebula anywhere in the code. So let's give this another shot here. Once again, it does have, the second nebula is missing stars, which effectively means it's not a nebula. Or I guess it could just be an empty nebula. I guess I'll have to debate on that one. Alright, so let's see, if I select this and I zoom in, once again though we're having an issue. The queue, it's saying the queue is empty. Okay, so perhaps then it is in fact actually just the fact that this queue is 32 long, but it does not actually have any objects inside of it yet. So let me see here. Can I just say like something like this? Let's see if this works, but I don't know if it's going to. This will impart a separate problem, which is that once again, Active Star Nebula is not activated. So let's see if that will actually... Okay, and here's a problem. Oh, no, it's not. Okay, never mind. So I zoom in here. It's just not referencing it. And I guess that makes sense. This can't be deactivated at start. But if it is activated at start so that it fills the queue, does it now have a queue differential? And it's still saying that there's a problem. Guess that's bizarre. It got to the next step, but for some reason it is suggesting that the position is incorrect for some reason. So how come this is not working? Let me see. Active Nebula is activated by default now, so that's going to generate the queue. Nebula has one element in one position, which means if I select the nebula and zoom in, it should work. So I'm not sure what I'm messing up here. So you guessed it, debugger time. We just reached the end of the video, but let me see if I can sort out why this is incorrect by default here. Often enough, it's just something that I'm missing. It's very straightforward, so let me see. Try and tweak this in before the time is up. In the event it will decide to compile for me. Okay, so let's start this up here. It has its values. They all have values, so if I select it and zoom in. Okay, so star, it's saying star is just null. Okay, so I'm just gonna have to bake in the objects. Okay, so I basically know what to do. Alright, well, that is it for this video. Thank you for taking a look. Another sort of refactoring dilemma, but this is going to allow me to generate way more nebula with their star values ready to go, and I won't have to physically instantiate every single star on startup. So it's going to massively accelerate load time, and then it's going to lower total memory consumption because it's simply pooling the stars. So that's going to be something that pays off well in the long run. So thanks for sticking with this video so far. I'm sorry I haven't gotten into anything new, but that's kind of the nature of refactoring, so I appreciate you for watching up to this point, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.